Hello, hola, and marhaba to the second episode of Gen Z AMIGAS weekly podcast, where young global women come together to explore the biggest trends and issues impacting the world every week. My name is Maha, and I'll be your host and moderator today. This week, the Middle East is at a crossroads. Earlier this Monday, January 27th, marked the 60-day deadline for Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon, following the US France backed ceasefire agreement signed on November 27th. This milestone brings quite a fresh hope for peace in the region and also renews critical conversations around the future of Lebanon, Gaza, and their people, essentially. And today's conversation couldn't be more timely as we dive into what a Trump 2.0 led Middle East could mean for Lebanon, Gaza, and the broader Arab world. From ceasefire progress to evolving US relations and the perspective of young Arab women, we'll be tackling the big questions of the moment. Now, over this next podcast, we'll break down this important topic into different segments. For example, the ceasefire outlook and what does the future hold for Lebanon and Gaza post ceasefire, the US relations under Trump 2.0, and how this administration's role affects Lebanon and Gaza and the trust within the Western diplomacy, and young Arab women's experience and how has being a global Gen Z Arab woman changed in recent years. And now I'm thrilled to introduce two inspiring voices for today's episode: Jude Daboubash from Lebanon and Talya Akkary from Egypt, who are both in their second year of university studying the Bachelor of Communication and Digital Media, like myself, at IE University, Spain. So thank you both for joining us. Now, let's get straight into it. There has been a lot of commentary out there saying that these ceasefires are very fragile and people are hoping that they will last, but there are so many questions out there about what's next and so many questions on people's minds regarding this. So now that these ceasefires are in effect and significant milestones like Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon are being reached, I want to start with the big question. What is the outlook for Lebanon and Gaza? So, Jude, let's start with you. As someone who has grown up in Lebanon her whole life, would you say you are optimistic about Lebanon and Gaza's future?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for the case of Lebanon, as I grew there and my parents are like there now, because we had the ceasefire and the past of the 60 days have already we've went beyond that, and especially we have a new president now, so we're hoping all Lebanese citizens are hoping that it's going to lead somewhere. We haven't yet seen changes, so obviously we've only heard words. We haven't seen actions yet by whether the government, the ceasefire, we don't really know if it's the end or not. Like at any time, anything new could happen because we didn't sign any contract to the Israel on paper showing that nothing will happen. So
Mm.
obviously, Lebanese citizens might be optimistic, yes, but at the same time, we're always putting our guards down because we don't know what could potentially happen. And for example, for the case of Gaza, obviously, I think the country needs help from international NGOs or international organizations at this point, because it's been since 1948 that the country has been controlled by Israel and they don't actually have a government. So I think at this point, implementing new NGOs coming to place can bring a bright future for the country. Maybe that's what I think could lead for it to at least have a step further. Um, um, in order for basically Israel to have peace, sorry, for Gaza to have peace and to rebuild a new future.
Okay, thank you. And Talia, you're from Egypt, and within the region, with a population of over 100 million people, and it too has its economic challenges. And while we're not specifically discussing it and its future, if anyone knows the geography, Gaza borders Egypt, and that border has seen great tension in the last 18 months as lots of tension from getting aid through the border, etc. And so, what do you think is Egypt's perspective, or maybe your perspective as an Egyptian, on having hopefully a bit more peace within the region?
Well, I know that definitely the Egyptian people and the president and a bit of myself actually were obviously worried about disrupting the peace or having Israel kind of go towards the Egyptian side again, since we know obviously the tensions that were happening in Rafah the whole time when people in Gaza were pushed to the south, and then also since we have history with Israel where they took over the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt and we pushed them out. So I think Egypt is already struggling with that area while trying to maintain peace, but also supporting Palestine, which is why Egypt tried to send so many humanitarian aid trucks
Yeah.
through the border, which were actually blocked. Like if you saw pictures of the border from Egypt side, the trucks were trying to go through, but they were blocked. So I think that's very hard because we're trying to help, but we weren't really able to as much as we wanted to. And then I think Egypt, especially the president, his perspective is that we're already dealing with the economic crisis and we're hosting 9 million refugees approximately and migrants, including approximately 300,000 from Sudan. And
Mm.
all history shows that when Palestinians were forced to leave their territory, they were not allowed to return back. And Egypt also doesn't want to be complicit in the ethnic cleansing in Gaza if all of them are forced to go into Egypt and then not allowed ever back into their homes. So I think it's a really complicated situation because the country is trying to care for themselves and their own citizens while also caring for their neighbors and trying to send them aid, but not wanting them to completely go into the country so that then they will not be back into their country. So I think it's a really like tricky situation that needs to be played very well so that it doesn't disrupt peace on any side. It doesn't offend anyone and it doesn't disrupt peace or trigger anything with Israel.
Thank you, Talia. And now, Jude, I want to revert back to you for a second, as in terms of Lebanon and its economy has been in a really bad condition for 20 years, really. So there's a lot of expats. And yes, there is income in terms of tourism. Yet, for example, the banking system collapsed a few years ago because of corruption. So my question to you is, what would you need to see happen to be ever convinced to return to Lebanon to live, or more specifically to work there?
Yeah, obviously, I feel like for like all Lebanese citizens, we have to see actions from the country, from the new government that we have. Obviously, when the corruption happened, when we had also the bomb that happened in 2020, and we had the economic crisis, it was a downfall for Lebanon. Everybody left. So obviously, the economic was very bad. But then now everybody is coming because everybody still has hope. Um, and so, for example, what I like from my personal, from what I can see from the news and I've heard, Trump, for example, when he was talking on the news, he stated some facts that could lead Lebanon somewhere, but also Gaza at some point. But is he really gonna state his sayings? Is he really gonna stick to what he's saying? So obviously, what he was saying in the news is something that Lebanon, but also Gaza, in some kind of extent, can believe that the ceasefire is still going to be there and another war won't happen with Israel, and we can in some extent like kind of trust the US and the point where they can accommodate us financially but also rebuild our countries, because I feel like Trump has this tie that he can have the possibility to do it, but obviously we still have to see actions, at least a starting point somewhere, in order for all the Lebanese citizens to be willing to see improvement in the country and come back, hopefully, for a brighter future.
Thank you, Jude. And now that kind of brings me on to my next point, where we focus on the US's evolving relationship with Lebanon and Gaza, particularly under Trump 2.0. And many have credited Trump with delivering ceasefires that the Biden administration struggled to achieve. However, trust within the Western diplomacy remains a divisive issue, as Jude has mentioned. And so, Talia, I'd like to ask you, do you see the US and the West as reliable partners for Lebanon and Gaza, especially after years of kind of standing by?
Actually, sadly, I do not. I don't think that they are reliable partners. I'm hopeful for Lebanon right now. I really am. And I really hope that this ceasefire actually extends and continues and is successful. But I'm very worried about Gaza right now because
Mhm.
especially with I was watching an interview for Trump last week and he was stating things saying that most of the Palestinians are dead anyways, and Gaza has very beautiful beaches. It's a very nice location. And that he said, I think it would be very beautiful if I rebuild it in a different way. And that
Mhm.
really worries me, especially that Trump is a businessman and he really focuses on his properties. And with his alliance with Israel and with his friendship with Netanyahu, and knowing that he's always going to support him, that really worries me, along with the fact that he was pushing for Jordan and Egypt to take all the other Palestinians. So it's really worrying me for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. I'm not as worried about the specific breaking of a ceasefire because Trump is not the kind of person that would want to spend money, as I know based on my previous research and experience looking at the US, spend money on war in the
Mhm.
Middle East. But I do think he does want to focus on maintaining good reputation and relationship with Israel and also focusing on his properties, which worries me for the pushing out of Palestinians from their homes and their ethnic cleansing. And especially that we know that the West is constantly backed by APAC, which is one of the biggest lobbying groups
Yep.
and the one that brings them the most money. And I simply don't trust the West side. And I hope that the Palestinians and the Lebanese can live in peace and not be worried this year like last year with what was happening.
Yeah, thank you, Talia. I very much agree with both your points of view, Jude and Talia. It could be argued that the US are trying to show commitment to the region, obviously through the ceasefires, but also, for example, how the US have invested $1 billion into a new embassy in Beirut. However, this, in my opinion, can be questionable, more towards Talia's point, as who knows whether it's a symbol of a step towards a reliable relationship between the Middle East and the US, or whether it's just another power move. Like Talia was saying, Trump is a businessman to frame the US as helpful and resourceful to the Middle East now that he is here. So that's definitely something to think about, and that will be in a lot of people's minds. And so, my final point, and finally, I'd like to focus on a more personal angle and how all of these developments affect the lives of young Arab women like ourselves. And so, I mean, I'm Lebanese and Irish who grew up in Dubai. So, I haven't really grown up in a place which within the Arab world, which has been significantly affected, like considering you both. So I'd like to know, Jude, as you said how Lebanon may or may not be ready to take on Gen Z like us, and to live there and work there. And so, someone who has lived in Lebanon her whole life and now Spain, how has your experience as a global Arab woman changed in recent years? Have you felt a shift in how people perceive you, especially in the light of the ongoing conflicts and political narratives?
Yeah, I'd obviously say like it got better but got worse. It's a bit of
Hmm.
both, I think.
Okay.
Especially first it got worse because of the war part. So when your home country, especially that I've lived there throughout my life, and it's only been 2 years I'm in Spain, you feel this sort of guilt that you're not with your family and that you can't leave Spain because we're at university, we have attendance, etc. So I just feel
Hmm.
like it was more guilt, and especially like every time that I would call my family to just check up on them, they wouldn't give me an answer. Like they would be like, "Oh yeah, it's fine, like nothing's happening." But then you open the news on the other side, or you receive notifications from news channels, and you're like, "No, something is happening." So
Hmm.
thank God my family was in a safe place, but still, like, I feel like there's always this thing between Lebanese where you try to comfort others. Like, you always don't, even, for example, they didn't want their daughter to be worried about them, but maybe something could have happened to them at any time, whether my parents or my sister. But I also felt better in the war, especially because I had a support system in Spain. Like, for example, you guys, you're in my class, there's a lot of Lebanese people here also. So we've been all a support system for each other. And I think that's what made us go through the war because we couldn't go back home. Maybe we didn't know if the airport was going to open or not, be closed. So I think the support system was the main element that helped us go through it. And I think that now we're past it. I'm glad that like everything was okay and everybody's safe now.
Well, I'm glad to hear. And Talia, I want to raise the same question. Having lived in Egypt and now Spain, how has your experience changed as a global Arab woman?
Well, I definitely think it actually changed a lot because, especially, I feel like we moved to Spain at a time that was like very significant in history, like where something in our region that's very significant started happening when we moved out to Spain. So I think definitely when we grew up in a community and a bubble that was obviously very supportive of the Palestinian cause, very against Israel, very like we were all on the same side. We all agreed with each other, and it was always a safe space and open space to talk. And then I
Mhm.
think we arrived here, and then suddenly, because of all the different influx of people from all over the world, your eyes really open to how much people have a different perspective of everything, and how
Mhm.
much so many people actually don't believe in this cause or are against it. And I think it really opened your eyes to, first of all, what other people think, and also what like other people's perspectives, and how to like discuss this while also maintaining your stance. So I think that was very important. It really showed you like an expansion of international diversity, and
Mhm.
I definitely think that that's the experience that changed for me. I feel like I became much more like open to other perspectives that I was unaware about or didn't really think about before. And even though I never changed my perspective, obviously,
Mhm.
it just shows me that other people were different, which is very weird, this sudden change after growing up in a community where everyone had exactly the same thoughts about everything. We know in Middle Eastern communities how culture is so tight and everyone always follows the same thing. So yeah.
100%. As young global Arab women, um, I want to bring up a kind of a different point how in terms of the Middle East and our kind of future opportunities. I mean, I grew up in Dubai, one city in the Middle East that has established itself as the new economic hub, you could say. And Lebanon at one point was the banking center of the Middle East. When the war started in the 70s, it gave the Gulf countries the opportunity to kind of thrive economically, whether it be banking, tourism. So I myself feel like I may stay on initially in Spain, but eventually move back to the Gulf as there is a huge opening and opportunities for us global Arab women, for example, in Saudi, to have these established roles within organizations there. So I think that's a cool point to add. And so I just like to, before we wrap up, I'd love for to each share one thought. And that one thought is if there was one change or action you'd like to see in the next year, whether it's in Lebanon, Gaza, or globally for the Middle East, what would it be? Jude, I'll start with you.
I think, like in general, I'm not just specifying about Lebanon and Gaza, but maybe
Yes.
raising more awareness about specific events that are happening in the world because I feel like there's a lot happening and maybe not necessarily the media, but certain people because nowadays a lot of things are happening. And when you talk about some stuff, maybe at some point, like you're interested in the topic, but because a lot of stuff are coming, you're like, you just leave it away. And I think that's not something that it's something that we should take more into consideration in order for especially our generation to start making a change somewhere. And get to a certain point where all these changes can be implemented in order to have a better world later on.
Thank you, Jude. And Talia, what's your thing that you want to change?
Well, I think I definitely want to see peace this year. But
Yeah.
I also want to see, I think, more like standing together in the Middle East and like brotherhood of all the nations, because I feel like this year it was actually, I mean, last year, it was actually really disappointing to see the support that was given to either the Lebanese or the Palestinians. I feel like a lot of Arab countries didn't really stick their ground or help as much as they were supposed to, since we're all neighbor countries. We're all
Mhm.
supposed to be a very close community, the Middle Eastern community. So I really hope that we can reach that like closeness and actually help each other like we're supposed to, because I think I was very disappointed about
Mhm.
last year how some countries stood.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really important to be all together and fight for our nations, etc. And so, well, I think it looks like our time is up. So thank you, Jude and Talia, for sharing your thoughtful insights and experiences today on Gen Z Amigas. It's really conversations like these that bring to light not only the challenges, but also the immense potential for change in Gaza and Lebanon and beyond. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to support us by liking and sharing this episode on Climate Penpal Media's LinkedIn and YouTube. And let's keep this conversation going online. Until next time, goodbye.